Welcome to Silver Creek Church Online, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today here at Silver Creek, our kids are meeting in our newly expanded theater room, and we are so thrilled that they get to experience that today. Pastor Matt is going to be delivering our service today and giving us a report on the things that are happening in Ukraine. Our hearts and prayers are with those who are crossing the border and who are experiencing challenges at this time. Thank you so much for joining us.
9 days into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and let's begin today in Lviv. The city is preparing its defences against advancing Russian troops. Some civilians have been working to expand an underground shelter to fit as many as 100 people. Others are training up to fight against the Russians.
Well, good morning. What I just showed there on the news clip is something that we're all familiar with. We've seen it a lot the last couple of weeks. What's happening around the other side of the world that we can't ignore. The age that we live in today is unlike any other. Because if you think about this, go back 50, 100 years, and people would have heard this news much later. It wouldn't have been known about until much later, until news could travel across the world. But now we can instantly know what's happening on the other side of the world. It's an interesting time we live in. So today, before I dive into the message, I want to give you a little bit of background about how I know some people that are in the Ukraine right now, how I know people on that side of the world. And it's through an interesting turn of events that have happened in my life. So I'm going to take you back to 1997. 1997, my family and I moved to Scotland. I was 27 years old at the time, the age of my eldest son right now, which is an interesting thought to think about. But wow. So yeah, moved to Scotland with my two kids. They were very young. My wife and I just had one and, well,
3 and 1.
I was going to say almost one, but 3 and 1, and moved ourselves to Scotland to start a new life as missionaries. And it was while we were there, we worked with a missions-based organization. And this organization not only did mission works in Scotland and the Great Britain region, which a lot of you might think, why would there be a mission base there? Long story, but the biggest thing is this: believe it or not, in that part of the world, which once at one time sent missionaries throughout the world to evangelize and spread the gospel, but over the centuries, their belief system had become so entrenched in religion into a series of steps and practices that they lost touch of what the relationship was to have with the very Creator Himself. And so that believe it or not, was a very big mission field in leading people in that country to a relationship with Jesus Christ. Not just hearing about what you're supposed to do or a judgmental God that punishes if you don't do right or wrong, but learning a relationship with a loving God who wants to know each and every one of His creation. So that's how that missions base started there, but they also did things throughout the rest of Europe and Eastern Europe. In fact, when the Iron Curtain fell, this missions organization was one of the first ones into the Ukraine, into Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, all those areas, to help establish churches. Mostly in the Ukraine, though, to establish churches, which would also become schools and orphanages. It was kind of an all-in-one. If you were starting a church there, you didn't just start a church. You took in children who had nowhere to go, and you taught the children because there were no school systems established at the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just take you through the history of Ukraine briefly. I'm not a history teacher. Thank goodness our teacher's not here today. We do have a history teacher that attends church here. But I'm going to give you just a brief history of what's happened just in the last 100 years or so, because it helps you understand a little bit of what's going on in the Ukraine right now. So going back quite a ways, even for centuries, Poland and Russia have had a bit of a tug of war going way back over this region of the Ukraine. Ukraine is a very rich agricultural area. The crops it grows are amazing. And so besides the large people group that were there, both Russia and Poland wanted that territory. And because it's between the two of them, it was a constant battle, taking it, retaking it, and going back and forth. Then in 1918, Russia had a civil war. And during the civil war Russia had, Ukraine saw the opportunity and became an independent nation at that time. So the first time that Ukraine could do that. But then in 1921, the Russians forced Ukraine, along with a lot of the other countries, into what they call the Soviet Union, kind of working all together under that socialistic communist party. Then in 1921, the Russians forced Ukraine to join the Soviet Union. Then Stalin, who actually was in power at the time, Stalin decreed that if you were in the Ukraine and you were a farmer, that now the state owned your land. And so the farmers didn't like that idea. And when Russia came in to start taking their taxes, basically, or what you owed to the state, was a portion of whatever crops you grew, a portion of the cattle and the livestock you had. Well, the Ukrainians didn't like this. The farmers didn't like it so much that to show rebellion, when the Russians would come, they would slaughter the livestock, or they would burn anything that they thought they were supposed to get. Stalin didn't like that. So the next thing Stalin did was he said, okay, you're going to do that. I'm going to raise the taxes, basically, what your dues you're supposed to pay to the state. And he raised it to such a high level that no farmer could do that as well as feed his own family. That started a nationwide famine. And believe it or not, in the years 1932 and 1933, approximately 7 million people died in Ukraine. Farmers starved to death. It was a famine caused because Russia was coming in and forcefully seizing whatever they had when they earned it. Then in 1937 to 39, Stalin rounded up families and executed or sent to labor camps anyone who caused problems and resisted. 1941, if you remember your history about our wars or world wars, Germany invaded. Millions more died in Ukraine during that period. Then in 1943, after the war, Stalin punished anyone accused of, if you collaborated with the Germans in any way, more people were killed through that process. And then in the more recent history, you might remember in 1986, Chernobyl. Remember Chernobyl? There was a nuclear problem that occurred at a power station. And Russia attempted to actually hide this, to kind of cover it up so that no one would find out about it. But the world ended up finding out. The Ukrainians, because that was in Ukraine, Ukrainians once again faced horrible suffering through that time. Then in 1989 to 1990, demonstrations broke out for independence from Russia in the Ukraine. And in 1991, if you were alive at that time, which I remember this happening, the Soviet Union collapsed. You remember pictures of the wall being taken down in pieces for people in those regions. And at that time, Ukraine became finally independent. But the transition from socialism to a democracy is not an easy transition. And this happened through the 90s. 1991 that began, but this began a process to transition. Because you have to understand that in the Ukraine, they had relied so much upon the Soviet Union and their socialist way of distribution and so on, that to make a sudden switch to all of a sudden that's taken away, there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of awkwardness, let's put it that way, between people. Some people still liked, well, hey, we liked it when Russia was doing this. At least we had something to do. It wasn't the greatest, but it was better than what we have now. And so you had a little bit of internal struggle going on in the country. Some said we should go back to Russia. Some said, no, we should stay independent. And that was a bit of the problem. During this time is when this organization called Mission of Compassion, which Levere and Beth Soper, I've got a picture of them here, pictured with Rachel and I, this is Levere and Beth Soper. They started this organization, and the mission base was in Scotland, but from there, they would train pastors and leaders in a Bible school setting, then send them back into the Ukraine region to establish churches. Through their ministry, more than 20 those churches, orphanages, schools were started and still exist to this day in Ukraine. Then in 1999, while the Ukraine's still in transition, you might even say it was a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, if you know that saying. Again, they're back and forth, but even, and here's something you may not understand, even their military was still a bit divided. Like, which general's loyal to, which way do they want to go? To the Soviet Union or to the Ukraine Republic? And even though they were all independent nation, there was a lot of corruption going on. If you were going into the country or out of the country, they would take things from you. You know, they would ask for a little bit of money if you want in or if you want out. So there's a lot of corruption going on, and it was a very dangerous time to live in that country. A lot of people were killed, and you'd have to keep walking, look the other way, because you didn't want to bring that trouble upon your family to see what was going on. So the Sopers took many trips themselves in the Ukraine region to help establish these churches and to help encourage the pastors and the leaders there. And here's another picture showing Lviv, and this is Sergei Baluk. This is the leader that Lviv established he oversees all 20 of the churches in Ukraine right now. So he and his wife are there right now working with the people in that country. Now in 1999, Lviv decided he needed to take a trip there and do a pastor's training conference. And he asked me to go with him. I was 29 at the time, and we were just fairly new missionaries, but he needed help getting on this trip, and I said I'd be happy to go with him and help him with that. But of course, like, I've never traveled to that part of the country before, so I was a little bit nervous. The reason I was a little bit nervous was because during the same time, you remember Kosovo, remember that was going on. And there was a lot of conflict going on in that country. And Russia was saying, US, UN, you should stay out of it. And there was a little bit of a back and forth power struggle between the UN and the United States in that time. To make matters worse, the night that we left to go on this trip, we read in the newspapers that the US decided to send some naval vessels into the area, and Russia responded with like kind, sending some of their naval vessels to the area. So here we're going into this country now, and we're like, what is about to happen? Are we about to go to war with Russia? We really didn't know at that time. And so Lviv told me, he said, okay, here's how we're going to do this. You can't fly directly into Ukraine because they don't grant visas that easily. Like we said, there's a lot of corruption, and you could try to apply for it, but it would take months and even years. So we would fly into Budapest. Budapest is south in Hungary. We would then get on a train in Budapest, take a train up into the country of the Ukraine. So this was the plan, but he told me, he said, there are 2 rules that you're going to have for this trip. First of all, you must never let your passport out of your hands. Don't let anybody, I don't care what happens, don't let anybody take that passport. And the second rule is don't speak English out loud while you're on the train, because there are people who will hear it and they'll take advantage of it. They'll either just come into the car and rob you blind, because what are you gonna do? You're an outsider in this area. So he said, we say nothing, we just nod at people, and we're supposed to meet a translator at some point, so that translator will help us once we get there. But until then, keep your mouth shut, and if somebody wants your passport, you don't leave with it. If they want, you go with it. So I knew those 2 rules. A little bit nervous. We're coming to this. Okay, we'll do this. So, so here we are. We're on this train, and these trains, you can't believe this. These cars are made out of wood, so it's like the old. You see those Western movies on TV with that's what they're like. All made out of wood. Looked a lot like that. It was probably built in that era, and that's just what they continue to use to this day, you guys. So we're on this train, and it's like, okay, this is crazy. Is it going to fall apart? I don't know. So we're riding this train. We're on our way going up through Hungary into the Ukraine. By the way, looking out the windows, you see nothing but huge fields of sunflowers. And that's why if you've seen a lot of people posting pictures of sunflowers in support of Ukraine, it's because in that region of the country, they grow really well. And if you may not know this, but sunflowers produce a lot of things, oil being one of the biggest things that they get from the sunflower. But it's a big commodity in the area, so there's tons of sunflower fields as you go up there. So the train's moving along. It's a long, long trip, hours upon hours. And suddenly the train comes to a stop. And when it stops, I look up my window, and I could see the border of the Ukraine. I could see the Constantine wire on the top. I could see all the fence, and I could see a guard tower. So I took a picture out my window very covertly and put my camera back away, because again, if Lviv had seen me, he'd have been like, don't, because you're going to show you're a tourist, you know. But I wanted to get a picture of it. And so there, you can't see them in this picture because it's grainy, but there's guards. They have AK-47s, and all at once, these guards board the train. And so they're in every single car. You've got at least 2 of them with AK-47s, military, full dressed, you know, military garb staying there. And then the train slowly moves, and they open a gate. The train goes through the gate, and then once it gets past the gate, it stops again. And the gate closes. So now you're in the country, everybody hold it. So then they start going through, and a guy comes through to check your passports at this point. Now this is a picture of a man not in the Ukraine, because if I'd have done that, I would have been in huge trouble. This is a picture I took of another guard on another trip. This is actually in Slovakia. But I took this picture then to kind of give the idea of what you knew what it felt like that day, except picture an AK-47 slung around his shoulder. So I'm standing there, and they come to our car, and so we hand them our passports, and they say a couple things and we don't know what to say back, and we're English, and no chance. And they're looking at our passports, they're looking at us, and they're saying a couple of things. Then hold on, another guard comes up, and I'm thinking, oh man, more guards come in now, and they're talking, they call something on the radio, like what's gonna happen here. The next thing you know, he's like, he does like this, and then he leaves with both our passports. And we look, and he gets off the train, and we're like, oh my gosh. And I'm more at Levere, I'm going, Levere? He's like, this isn't supposed to happen. I'm like, he's like, what are you gonna do? There's guards standing there. It's like, you're not gonna excuse me, we're feeling like very much you don't do nothing out of turn because you don't know what's gonna happen to you next. Because it was very well known to us. Other missionaries have been apprehended, other missionaries have been put into prison or even taken to the side and handed to some other guys who could then take you for ransom and try to extort money from your relatives back. So we knew that we just needed to keep our mouths shut for now, but we are praying like you would not believe under our breath. So we're waiting there for a long period of time goes by. I don't know, time just was hard to gauge at that point. But all I know is it's getting closer and closer to dark now because it was daylight when we came in. So they motioned us to come off the train with them. So they take us into this ginormous building. I know that's not a word, but it's a huge building. And if you can picture, if you've ever been in the, it's the Flint IMA, what is it called now? The Dordt Federal Event Center. It changes names so often. The Dordt Federal Center place. If you've been in there and you ever walk down in the main part of the arena on the floor and look up, that's what this building was like in size, or at least how it felt. And all these huge walls are murals of Stalin, murals of the sickle and the Russian Soviet Union symbolism. All this, and it's meant to intimidate you. And guys, it worked. It's all meant to intimidate you that we are a country of power. We are a Soviet Union of power. And so you can try to come in here, this is what you're facing. And I've seen this in this building is meant to take, for people coming in or coming out to feel like, okay, this is where you're going to get your visa permission to come in the country or you'll get denied. So we're led to this place while everyone else is all getting off the train and going about their way. We're held off to the side and we're like, okay. Again, with two guards standing there with their AK-47s. More time passes by. Finally, we're led to another part of a line, and we could see, and I'm like, I think I see the guy who took our passport. It's like back in another room behind some glass, and they're going back and forth. They're picking up phones, they're calling, and we're just like, Lord, I just want to see my family again. This is what I'm thinking this time, because we didn't know, like on the train, did war break out with Russia? And now are they calling a check like, what are we gonna do now? Because if war did break out, Ukraine would have been immediately like seized back into the Soviet Union at that time. That would have just been an automatic. So we're like, what are we gonna do? And then finally they let us through that part of it and said, a guy came out that spoke broken English and said, okay, well, after he asked me a few questions, what are you here for? What's your business? And tourism. And they're looking at you like, tourism? And because you couldn't say evangelize because that was against the rules. So they let us through and they let us go through, and we get to one last guy before we can go out. And so he's standing there, he looks at us, he looks at our passports, and he speaks broken English. He says, I collect US coins. And we're like, what? And Levere goes, give him some money. So we're like, we're not, at this point, we're not carrying, we're trying not to carry it. But I find I had a bag where I dug down, I found some coins I had, and I said, he's like, oh, yes. And he smiled then, he took these, go there. All right, so thankfully with a few dollars of change, which to them was a whole lot more than that, believe me, we were able to get through that part of it. So now we're in this country, and now it's dark. And the person who was supposed to pick us up has been waiting there for hours. And they got a little, very small, one of those little mini vans, like a Volkswagen-looking minivan, there for us to get into. And here's the problem. These guys, the interpreter's arguing, because now we're with our interpreter. He's arguing with the driver, going back and forth, and we're like, what's the problem? He said, the problem is we're past curfew now. You've taken so long getting out of there, we're past curfew. There's a strict curfew that only people that are to be out traveling the streets right now are people who have specific work permits to go to work your job for whatever third shift or whatever. And we're like, okay, good. And we've got to travel about 20 miles to get you to the other side of this town to get you where you got to go. And this guy doesn't want to do it because there's several checkpoints along the way. Okay, and so Levere pulls out some money, and the guy was persuaded to take a chance to take us. But when we got in the van, the interpreter told us, here's a bunch of blankets. If we get to a checkpoint, if I tell you to, you need to be very quiet and hide under the blankets. And I'm like, what? Is this a movie? Like, what is going on? I mean, I didn't expect this when I signed up for this, but the way events turned, this is what was happening. So we're riding, and I'll never forget, we kind of cowered down the seats, quite frankly, a little bit, and they, of course, told us, you don't say a word at nothing. And we're driving through, and then I see over here, I see like a roundabout that we're driving around, and I see the guard with the AK-47, and I see him waving for us to stop, and the driver and the interpreter, like, they said something in Ukrainian back for blah, 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 and there's, and they kept around going. I'm like, oh my gosh. They kept around going, and the interpreter looked back and said, it's okay, we just pretended not to see him. We just didn't make eye contact. And we're like, oh Lord. But so we got through that one. And another one, they did stop us. And so we kind of cowered. They didn't tell us to get in the blankets. We cowered in the seat, and they were saying something back and forth, had a flashlight, looking, shines it around in the vehicle at us, and said a few things, and then he let him go, and the interpreter looked back and said, that was a miracle right there. Because the guy just told him that, well, we were running late, we had to quickly get home. And he said, go ahead. He said, that never happens. They at least want to get money from you or something. So we got through that by the grace of God. So after that night, we get to the place that we're supposed to stay. We stayed the night. Again, it was very late. Get up the next day to begin our traveling to another place where we're going to speak. And as we're traveling, I want to show you a picture. This is what we began to see. We began to see basically abandoned airfields from where the Soviet Union was establishing. Because you may not realize, but the Ukraine is what was called the Iron Curtain. You ever heard the term Iron Curtain? Iron Curtain referred to the country of Ukraine because that was what separated Russia from the rest of Europe. So for Russia, this is very important because this is their front door. And they want to make sure the front door is locked really good. And so they had a lot of military established throughout Ukraine in a presence. But when the Soviet Union crumbled, a lot of these things were just abandoned. And so this is what we saw. And this is back in 1999, mind you. So I'm sure it looks much different today. But we saw a lot of abandoned bases and things and abandoned buildings. And we got a chance to teach. And while we were teaching, I had an opportunity. I was invited to go speak at a gypsy village. There was a group of gypsy people. A lot of gypsy people live in the Ukraine region. And it's much like you would see in any part of the world. Gypsies are often looked down upon. It's very racist in the way they're viewed and treated very poorly. And so the gypsies lived in far worse conditions than other people lived, and it was already bad. And so I was invited to go there to speak. And Levere told me before I left, because I went without him, we separated, he said, well, whatever you do, don't eat or drink anything, because in this part of the world, you're going to get sick if you do. I said, no problem. And so we travel along, and then I got a picture here of the next one, if you show that one there. These are bricks, and this is made out of straw and clay. And this is what they still use to this day to build buildings in this region, especially the gypsies. They would use these, let them dry out in the sun, and then after they dried for a long time, then they become the bricks they build their homes with in their different buildings. And so while I was there, I also got to have a meal with some of the people. Now, again, remember I was told not to, but I was invited by this family, and these are the leaders of the Gypsy church. And the interpreter told me, he said, this is going to be a tremendous insult if you don't accept their invitation, because they hardly have any food as it is. But they had a huge spread of food. It's probably all they had that they laid out for me, because I came to bring the word of God to their village that day. I just said, okay. And this is the interpreter, and I said, I'm willing to go for it if you are. He said, all right, let's go for it. And so we did. We both went in there, and you guys, it was some of the best food I've had in my life. You talk about cabbage rolls. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, these are incredible. The food was incredible. Homemade bread, baked right in the clay oven that she had just off to the side. The small home that was half the size of this room was the entire home. And we were in one small part of it that was where we would sit and eat. And so while I was there, though, I had to speak through several interpreters, because I had to speak to this interpreter who spoke in Russian. Then he would interpret into Ukrainian, and then the Ukrainian interpreter interpreted into the Gypsy language. And so it was very awkward. Never have I done it before, where I'd say something, and then it would be blah, blah, blah. And then God said blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, holy moly. And I'm thinking to myself, what could go wrong? Lose translation. But I think it still went well. The people were ministered to, and they responded afterwards with positive things. And so I think it went well. Now, once we finished our ministry in Ukraine, we then went to the country of Slovakia, which is right next door. And a guy came and picked us up. His name is Miro. And this is Miro here. I'm sorry, before I get to that picture. This is the leaders of the Gypsy Church. Go ahead, go back to that one. It's all right. The leaders of the Gypsy Church there in that country. These are all the leaders that we got to minister with that day. So now we go to the next one. And this is Miro. And Miro speaks excellent English, by the way. Studied it for a long time in school, and just an incredible communicator, interpreter. And he's, I think he's 20 years old this time. And so he and I met for the first time on this trip, and he gave us a ride, very long ride through his vehicle into the country of Slovakia. And I've known him for many years since, and we're friends to this day. Now, also as Jan and Marta, that's the next picture, they're the pastors of this church in Slovakia. They started this church in Slovakia in their home, and it began to grow from there until they were ready to build a building. And we're standing right here in 1999 on the property that they began to develop and build for their church, to have a building to meet them for the first time, because they had always met in rented spaces, much like we have here right now. And so this is growing at this time to become the largest evangelical church in Slovakia at the time. It's growing to that point at that time. And these are more pictures of us working throughout the hallways. You go ahead and this is a picture of building a staircase. They build forms, and the entire staircase is built out of concrete. They build almost everything out of concrete because it's one of the most inexpensive materials they could come up with there. And I think there's one more as well that'll show. This is a team. Now this is a team. I came back after 1999. I went back to the mission base, and then I gathered a team from the United States, from Ovid actually. And this is my brother, Kurt, right here. And so my brother, as well as other people from his church, sent a construction team. We have guys on here who are experienced mason workers and so on. And so we took a team to help them work on this church building that they started back in 99. And then this picture's taken in I don't know if it was 2000, I think it was just a year later. And we were helping them to establish and to build that church. And then I think there's another picture showing us working. There's me on a ladder with a hammer, doing some work there, and then another one too, I think. Yeah, showing this is where the main auditorium would be of that church, showing the enormity of that. The church now at this time is the largest church on the eastern side of Slovakia. I believe they're running around 500 people in attendance on a given Sunday morning at the church there. And so their church is positioned right on the eastern corner of Slovakia, very close to the Ukrainian border. And when I say very close, I mean the largest city close. They're still about an hour's drive, maybe an hour and a half drive, but it's the largest city that's close to the border. There's very small villages other than that. And so at this time, we had an opportunity to come and help them to continue to build that church. And I'm happy to say that we took the church to the next level, and since then the church was completed. It's doing really well to this day. So this week, we're watching the news, and we're seeing what's happening in the Ukraine. And if you're like me, there's a question that comes to your mind and your heart. What am I supposed to do? Like, as a Christian, I see other people hurting, and I see them going through suffering. So what should I do? What does God expect me to do as a Christian on the other side of the world with whatever resources I have? Because, I don't know if you think about this, I think about this all the time. There's lots of problems. There's lots of places that we can send our money to help people. But how do you pick? Because there's so many. There's no way that we could even attempt to address them all. But we have to pick and choose. So how do we do that? And the question I would ask is, does God expect us to help every single person that we're aware of? Does he expect us to reach out and make a difference with every single place in the world that's having a problem? And I don't think he does. I don't think God expects us to help every single place in the world. But however, we are supposed to help who we can with what we have when we can. We are supposed to do that. Jesus teaches that very clearly, to be generous, to be helpful. And so there's this struggle that I feel between this, of knowing when is the right time. Because we are called to aid our brothers and our sisters. Even when they don't live next door to us, even when they're not in the same town or the same state, we are called to help them in some way if we can. But how do we know when we're off the hook, so to speak? How do we know when it's not our time? So we're going to look at some scripture to talk about this today. It's in Mark chapter 8. And Jesus is talking with his disciples. And there's something along these lines that comes up in the scripture that we're going to look at in Mark chapter 8. But before the scripture, I want you to remember, Jesus has fed thousands of people twice by this time. And each time he didn't just grab a rock or a blade of grass and transform it into food for these people. Each time a miracle took place using food they already had amongst themselves. So we'll start off here with verse number 1. During those days, another large crowd gathered. So this is after Jesus had fed 5,000. And if you were here for our message just a couple weeks ago, we just spoke about that time. So this is shortly after that. Talking about the crowd. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance. So Jesus is in this struggle like we have. There's thousands of people, thousands of opportunities right in front of him. And the disciples see it too. And he has compassion to help, but how in the world could he possibly help all these people? Verse number 4. Pardon me, I'm going to wet my whistle. Verse number 4, his disciples answered, but where in this remote place, or you might say, where in God's green earth, possibly, if it was modern day vernacular, can anyone get enough bread to feed them? Like Jesus, we're out in the middle of nowhere. Where is anyone going to get enough bread to feed these people? Now, as readers of this, thousands of years later, it's easy for us to go, duh, guys, Jesus just did the miracle recently, don't you remember? But when you're living in the moment, it's different, it's personal. Much like it is for us. When we're trying to decide who can we help, where can we help, it's personal because I've got a finite amount of resources at my disposal that I can work with here. And I can't just give it all to everybody. So what in the world am I supposed to do? The disciples in this situation, because they know what he did last time, and so they're like, well, maybe they didn't remember. I don't know what was happening, but they asked that question. So verse 5, Jesus responds, how many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. So in other words, he's like, what's in your lunchbox? What's that cooler over there, guys? What's in the cooler over there? Because they had already planned ahead of time. The disciples knew ahead of time we're going to be traveling, so they gathered provisions and supplies for this long trip. They were used to it because they knew when Jesus said we're going somewhere, like, how long we go? We don't know. Let's plan for the worst. So they had tons of stuff. So they did have food. When other people were out, they apparently still had some left. So Jesus asked him. 7, they replied. Now, I wonder if you're thinking like, were they feeling a little bit ashamed at this point? Like, okay, I guess we should have saw this coming. Jesus did this before. I don't know how they felt this time, but let's continue. Here's how the story goes. Verse 6. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them, and once again he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. This time, though, the disciples, knowing exactly what's going on, they knew what to do. They knew that, okay, I'm supposed to take this and hand it out and distribute it to these people. And they did so. Verse 7, they had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000, by the way, were present. All Jesus asked for, because the guys are like, what are we going to do, Lord? We're in the middle of nowhere. And Jesus said, what do you have? All they asked for was what they had at the moment, what they had with them. Remember, He could have done anything to make this miracle happen. He's Jesus. He could have done anything. He could have called on somebody and said, hand me your cloak, and then taken the cloak and a basket full of bread. He could have done anything like that. He's Jesus. But he chose to ask the disciples, would you guys be willing to give up what you have for the chance that it might feed a few, maybe even all these people? By this time, they'd seen it happen once. So I think the disciples knew there's something really big about to go down. When we hand this out, I think there's going to be enough. And there was. Everyone was full. There were broken pieces left over to fill 7 basketfuls. Incredible. And then it continues. After he had sent them away, talking about Jesus, after Jesus had sent the people away, he got into the boat with his disciples. Remember, they're always traveling by boat. They're usually surrounded in the Sea of Galilee or in the region like that. They're constantly traveling back and forth by boat. And went to the region, and this city, Dalmanutha, this city is a mystery as to like modern scholars, modern historians have debated where is this? What could it be? And guess what? I don't know. They don't know. The best guess is it's the village or the city where Mary of Magdalene came from. That's the best one that they got. Continues in verse 11. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. And when they say a sign from heaven, they're talking a miracle, something miraculous to happen. He sighed. Jesus sighed deeply and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it. I don't think we've changed that much over the centuries. Because don't we find ourselves craving, wanting to see the fantastic, the miraculous, the impossible become possible? It's so easy for churches, for Christians, for believers to almost get hooked on that feeling you get when you see something miraculous happen. Or you hear people say about, I went to this worship concert and oh my gosh, I felt the presence of God. And they find themselves craving to want to feel that again. That feeling, that miraculous, the wonderful, the spectacular. That is all part of God. But people find themselves wanting it. And Jesus, seeing that, sighed deeply. Because they're missing it. It's not the power. It's the one that gives the power we should be seeking. So verse 13. Then he left them, got back into the boat. In other words, they're like, can we see a miracle? And Jesus is like, you're not going to see a sign. Elvis left the building. Bye, it's gone, done. So he gets back into the boat and crossed to the other side of the lake. So in other words, he's gone. The disciples, and these are huge lakes, by the way, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread. Interesting. Out of 7 basketfuls, they forgot to grab some. Except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. Jesus said, be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Now this perplexed the disciples. They're thinking to themselves, what? Because Jesus was constantly talking above them in many ways where they had to sit down and think about it afterwards. Like, okay, what did he mean by that? Like, what is he trying to say to me right now? So the disciples are trying to figure out what Jesus meant by this. And verse 16 tells us, they discussed with one another, and they said, or they came up with, it is because we have no bread. Aha, they're like, okay. The reason Jesus said that is because we don't have any bread. So he's just like, be careful of that or whatever. So they're having this discussion, they're going on. Verse 17, aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Which is a pretty good indication that they missed it. Verse 18, Jesus continues, do you have eyes but fail to see? These are harsh words, by the way. And ears but fail to hear? Are you deaf and dumb? Right? I mean, that's what he's saying. And don't you remember? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12. One of them answered. I'm sure it's just one, kind of in the background. 12. Continues on. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, just now, by the way, I'm adding that, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. So now the disciples are starting to kind of get it. They're like, okay, wait a second. Jesus isn't literally talking about the bread. He said to them, do you still not understand? Do you still not see it? Do you not get it? Yeast, when you put yeast in dough, it makes it expand. And if you've ever left it unattended for a period of time, having worked in a pizzeria once, I know what happens when you close it up in a bag and leave it sitting somewhere. It becomes enormous. It grows crazy. Yeast expands almost out of control, much like a virus. Yeast just takes off and takes over whatever it's around. And Jesus is pointing out that unbelief and doubt spread just as quickly. The Pharisees' biggest problem was their unbelief and their doubt. They wanted to see the miraculous. They wanted to see proof. One more time, Jesus. I know what you just did. One more time. It was never enough. One more. Give us one more sign. Give us one more miracle. I know what you did last time, but maybe that was just a coincidence. One more, And Jesus is going, you're missing the point. It's about faith and trust. It's about faith and trust. So that's what the Pharisees wanted. But now Herod, remember, he mentioned Herod as well. Herod was the leader of the Jewish people at that time. Kind of their president, if you want to. I'm using a modern term to give us an understanding. That's what Herod was at that time. And Herod had his position because the Roman rulers at the time, the Romans said, we're going to let you have this position. And because you have this position, here's a few gifts. Here's some nice riches for you. Here's some women to have in your palace. They started giving him all these things. And guess what? Herod started liking all of these carnal, all these earthly things he could enjoy now in the temporary. Things that went against his faith. Things that he knew were wrong, he allowed to happen in his palace. He allowed to happen in his place. He had allowed himself to be tainted by a little bit of what seemed like a good, nice thing the Romans were giving. It grew out of control until Herod was in a place where he could no longer be used by God. He was frankly a puppet for the Roman government at this time. And all the Jewish people knew it. So when Jesus said that, and those guys had time to think about it, like, oh, we know Herod. He used to be a really cool guy. But then he got into power and something happened. So Jesus is trying to help him to help these guys to see this is what happens to us. That when we substitute our faith for God for what we can have the instant now, because we're creatures that want it now. We want it my way, right away, now. We don't want to wait. When Amazon says 3 days or 1 day shipping, I want the 1 day shipping. I want it today. When you're at the store and they say, oh, we can't go and get that for you now, but we can get it to you later. I want it now. I'll drive across town. I'll find another store where I can get what I want now. You pull into the burger place and it says, this little sign, sorry, this current time, we don't have any fries. I want my fries now. This is the culture we live in. We're so used to getting what we want right now. When I go to a place to eat, we can talk about where do you want to eat. We have a plethora of choices. We're going to go out to eat tonight. Do you want Chinese? Do you want this? Do you want this? We can pick a million choices. We're spoiled. We're spoiled. And we can't help it. Jesus is warning them to watch out for yourself to start liking things so much that you find yourself in a place where Herod had gotten to, where the Pharisees had gotten to. He's warning them. And so reminding us what Jesus did, all he required was what the disciples had with them at the time. He didn't say to them, how much you got back home. He didn't say to them, what total could you gather up if you really worked hard enough. He just said, what do you have in your pocket? What do you have in your pocket right now, Jesus said. I can use that, he said. I can use that and I can do something with that. I can take that, if you're willing to give, I can take that and multiply that. And I can do a miracle with it. But it requires you to surrender it first. In other words, Jesus isn't just going to work with whatever. He wants to work with our surrendered hearts to perform a miracle. And so, before we continue, I want to stop right now and I want to let you see a video that I've got from Miro. Now, I was hoping to do a live chat with them this morning. I was going to have a live video feed with Miro and some people in Ukraine. But the problem is, I had to change my request because they are so busy right now. They're running back and forth in vehicles and they're so busy, they just don't have time. They frankly didn't have time. They would have had, in order for me to ask for that, they would have had to have stopped because they're 6 hours ahead of us. So even right now, it's already 5 o'clock. They would have had to have stopped what they're in the middle of doing to stop and talk to us and then go back to it. I didn't want to stop them for what they're doing because what they're doing is so important. So what I said to him, I said, can you take a few minutes and make a video for us? He said, absolutely. So he stopped, this happened just a day ago, made a video and pulled in one of the refugees who spoke good English to talk, and I'd like you to see now and hear what's happening from Miro.
Hello, dear friends. My name is Miro Toth, and I serve in a pastoral team in Košice's Apostolic Church. Košice is strategically placed in the eastern corner of Slovakia and also in eastern corner of European Union. As everybody knows, what happened just a week ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, which was an act of aggression that was unprovoked. Since then, we as a church, we as an area, we are getting a massive wave of immigrants who are trying to leave and flee the horrors of the war. We started to catch those families first day of the war together with men, and as of second day of war, it's just women and children. We did not have much experience in humanitarian help, but within last 7 days, the curve was very, very steep. And basically, as a church, we are involved in having refugees who are here for a short time, midterm, and those who would like to relocate and start a new life in our city, or they would like to go deeper in Europe. I will tell you a little bit more slightly later, but I think it would be best for you to hear for one of the refugees. On my right side, this is Oksana from Ukraine.
My name is Oksana and I'm from Kiev, Ukraine. I have 2 little kids with me and my husband have stayed in Ukraine. We have escaped from the war that has happened in our country, and many people who are left there, they are barely surviving. They are stuck in the bomb shelters. My sister is still in Kiev and I've been talking with her on the phone, and she would need to hide once in a while and she would need to stop talking, hold on the phone, and she need to run to the bomb shelter, which is horrible. Many hospitals, many children are living in the basements, and it's terrible, and many are being killed, and it's happening on the streets of my city, and it breaks our hearts. So we are glad that we could have got to this safe place where people take care of us. We feel like we've known each other for many years, even though we have just met. So this is such a good place for us to be, because many people are having a long way to get here, and sometimes it's a couple days when people are having no food, no bed, and here they find a safe place and care of the church here. So we are glad that we are here, and yes, so we appreciate everything the church is doing for us and all the efforts.
Thank you very much, Oksana. So we as a church, we are active in basically 4 streams of help. First stream is manpower, people who are willing to give their time, their talent, their hands, their feet. The second stream of our help is that we try to channel the immigrants to get them from border. As I speak now, there are several cars that are waiting at the trains, or they are going to Ukrainian border to get the refugees here to our side to safety, and then further on to Europe. Another thing is that we are doing this video from our church lobby. Usually there are people going, chit-chatting, and just an amazing atmosphere. And now it has changed to a humanitarian warehouse, and there are cars, vans, trucks, or big 18-wheeler version of truck. They are coming and bringing their help. We use everything. Also, third, in a very practical way, we want to be active in this massive saving action is the money. As you know, one of the mission principles is that not everybody can go, but everybody can send. And I believe that in this precarious situation, all of us are praying. But in such an extreme situation as we are facing now, sometimes the prayer is not enough, even though prayer is a powerful weapon, and I believe that prayer of the righteous avails much. We believe that. But also, if you are praying about this conflict and the Lord is placing on your heart to be more practical, to be able to participate, maybe to send funds as individuals or churches, and if you put in the note Ukrainian relief or Ukraine simple, 100 out of 100% will go toward Ukrainian relief. Those people that sent you the link to this video, they are working with us probably since the fall of Iron Curtain in 1991, so they know us for a long time, and we invite you to help us help others. So this is our appeal. Please pray for us. Of course, let's focus our prayers for Ukraine, but the wave of refugees that is coming, we are the bumper zone, and it's coming through our city, and we want to be Jesus' hands and feet, and we want to make the love of God tangible for them. So thank you very much for being part of this, and we wish you God's blessing, God's guidance, and also heart that is willing to help. God bless you. Bye-bye.
And so I'm the one that you're talking about. They sent the link. I basically sent this this video out to all the pastor friends that I know throughout, Michigan as well as Florida and different places that I've been connected with. Because I told them, I said, send this to me. I'm going to send it out to several other people as well to let them know how they can help with these guys. So the question comes back is, how do I know individually? How do I know when I'm supposed to help and respond to something like this when someone asks for help? And even as the pastor of the church, this is a question I have to wrestle with too. How do I know when Silver Creek Church is supposed to step in and help with something somewhere? Like, when is the right time to do that? And so I've actually come up with a three-part test, if you will, for us to know when it's time for both you and individuals and for myself as a leader as well. Number one is, when God's going to lead your heart, number one is you become aware of the need. So, in other words, you just find out, hey, there's a problem, there's something going on. Number one, you can become aware of it. Number two, you can think of a practical way that you could help. Sometimes you become aware of a need and you're like, there's just no way, there's nothing I have or nothing I can do to help it. But sometimes you can think of a practical way that you could help. And number three, in prayer time, you prayerfully take it before the Lord, you feel a burden or you feel urgency, like something inside you just stirring, saying, I think I need to do something about this. And that's very simply, I think, how you can be guided by God to know when you're supposed to or when you're not. And this is what I follow when I'm praying for us as a church. Except if I had a fourth step, I make myself accountable to the other leaders I have within the church, close leaders. I meet with them and I say, pray with me on this. Tell me if I'm wrong. Do you agree? And when they agree, I say, okay, I know we're on the right track then. So in this situation, I did just that. And I believe that we as a church are supposed to do something. I believe that we as a church could gather together some funds, and I think that we could send some funds to help them. Because there's so many things we're not thinking of, but when they're taking multiple trips to a border with their vehicles every day, think about the amount of petrol, gas that they're going through, traveling every day. Who's paying for that? And think about all the food when they get them there. They got to feed these people. The volunteers going back and forth, but also the people that are there. And this is happening as we speak. there's people like 2 more just across the border. Like it's happening right now. When people come across the border, what happens is the people from their church, they'll drive a vehicle, take supplies to Ukraine. Once they get them in Ukraine, on the way back, they stop at the border, and on the other side of the border, they look for people who don't have anywhere to go, and they say, do you need somewhere to go? And those people are with their children, we don't have anywhere to go. We have a place. Come on. Put them in their vehicle, and they take them back to their church in Košice. That's what's happening right now. And I want to help them with that. I think if I could be there doing that, you guys, I'd be on a plane in the next hour. I'd be on that plane if I could and go there. And I think you feel the same way. We want to do something to help these people. So we can. And I think we can gather together some money and we can send it their way. And so I'm going to ask you to give today, either in our give station. You could give online through our PayPal. If you're online, you could give through the PayPal in the link. Just put the word Ukraine. There'll be a place for a note or a memo in the PayPal. Put the word Ukraine. You can find our PayPal link on our website, silvercreek.church. That's one simple way to do it. If you give here in person, you can use an envelope and write Ukraine on the envelope, or again, do it through PayPal. We're going to give ourselves a full week to gather these funds together, and then we'll send something next week is when we'll send it. So you don't have to make action at this very moment, but you can do it sometime this week. And I think we could do something really good with this. I find it convicting to me that in the Muslim cultures, you may or may not know this, but in the Muslim culture, if anyone asks them of anything face to face, they are compelled to help them in any way they can, even if it means they have to go without in the process of helping you. And they live this out and they do this. And I'm convicted by this. As a Christian, I'm convicted because I know there's some times where I might not do that, or I haven't in the past always done that. And I feel convicted by their enormous amount of dedication to what they believe. And so Jesus is just asking us, what do you have, and are you willing to give it, to trust me, and I can do a miracle through it. There's no way we can help everybody, but maybe we can give a little bit, and through that, Jesus can do a miracle with it and help a lot of people in Ukraine. So will you bow your heads and pray with me as we close our service? Heavenly Father, we don't know exactly how we could help personally, but Lord, I think you're tugging on our hearts to do something financially. And I think we could give something, we could send it to them, and I think you could do a miracle through that, God, and help all these people who are finding a place. These families like we saw, now that we have a face and a name, like Oksana and her little kids who had to leave their father, their husband, in the country to escape. That Father, there's people like that we know we have a face and a name now to put with it. So Lord, I pray that you help us to help them. Give us the courage to step out in faith and do something to make a difference and to help. And we thank you, God, for the people that you've got there being our hands and our feet right now in the country of Slovakia. It's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Now, if you'll stand with me, we're going to sing one last song together as we close out our service.
I need you to soften my heart and break me apart. I need you to open my eyes to see that you're shaping my life. All I am, I surrender. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good, your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. I need you to soften my heart, break me apart. I need you trust what you say, that you're good, your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good, your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
We were so glad to see you today. We will see you here next Sunday. You're dismissed.